Hi guys, hope you all doing well. Welcome back to our series of Azure AD Advanced Troubleshooting. And in this video, we are going to talk about app registration. Now, if you're watching this series from the beginning, in the last video, we have discussed about types of applications in Azure Active Directory, wherein we have discussed about resource dependent application and resource oriented applications, as well as we have discussed about different kind of endpoints which are available and in which condition you should use which kind of protocol. Okay, the agenda of this video will be knowing the new portal experience wherein you have to add applications that you are developing. That means I'm going to cover the section or the option which is named as app registration, and I will be covering each and every option inside that particular tab or inside that particular console so that you can get more insights. Now, as I've said before, that in order to have advance a skill set of any technology, you need to know each and every option, and you need to know how the core part of any application works. So that's why I'll try to be as much as descriptive possible. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comment section or send me an email directly at learnconceptswork@gmail.com. The last thing that I will be showing you guys is a script, and on the basis of that particular script, we'll get a verification that whether the client ID and client secret that we are creating after the application is created is working appropriately or not. Okay. Now, a very generic prerequisite that will be required for this entire playlist is if you have not watched the SAS and OAuth series, please complete them. Then things will be more relatable and you will understand concepts more firmly. And again, if you guys have any questions, you are free to use comment section like anything. Now, since this will be a complete lab demo session, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to my browser where I have signed in as global admin. Now, there is a reason why I am not covering this enterprise application section because this is moreover used for those applications which use SAML, and I have already covered this SAML section a lot more detail in the SAS playlist. I will be creating a SAS playlist video for SAML, but that will be for generic channel videos. But this video that I'm creating right now and the kind of details I'm covering in this particular video is specifically for members. So I'm trying to be as core as possible with all the set of options that you get in the app registration section. The very first thing that we have to understand is why we use app registration option. Okay. In cases wherein you are developing your own application, nobody in this world knows about your application, and this is the first time your application is getting registered in any of the Azure Active Directory, then you will use this option. Okay, now this is something which I'm talking about at the enterprise level, but even as a developer for testing, if you are developing your own application, okay, then choose this option. Now let me show you an option which will make things exceptionally relatable. Okay, now let's say I don't go to this app registration section, I'll go to enterprise application. Okay, and now I'm going to click on new application. As we all know that these are gallery apps, this is your Azure AD application proxy, and you choose this option to add a cloud app which can understand SAML. Okay. Now the first option which is here, which is application that you are developing, the moment I click on that, as you can see, I'm getting this option which says, okay, take me to the app registration page. Okay. Now the moment I will click on this, I will land up to the app registration section, which is the same console that you will get if you will click on app registration. So one liner answer for you why you should use this option, because the app that you are going to add is your own app. It's this much simple. Okay. So now the moment you click on app registration, the first option that you have to select is new registration. Now, if you guys remember in the last video, we have discussed about all these endpoints. What are v2.0 endpoints? What are v1.0 endpoints? What is federation metadata? What is well-known configuration? So I assume that you guys already know all that. And now the next step is the process of creation of application object. Now, what do I mean by this? That whenever you will use this particular console to add an application, there are two kinds of objects which are created in the directory. The first one is application object and the other one is service principal object. The application object that will get created from here will hold the schema of your application, whereas the service principal object is going to hold all the permissions and all the consent objects will get mapped to your service principal object. Okay. So now the first option that we are getting is to type a name. So let's say we are talking about app registration and this is my custom app. Whatever name you want, you can choose it from here. Okay. The first option says account in organizational directory only. Now let's say this is your directory, contoso.com. If you select this particular option, the users that exist in this particular directory will only be able to sign in. No one else will be able to sign in into this particular application. The second option that you see here is any user that exists in Azure AD will be able to sign in. Now, the third option that you see here, which says accounts in any organizational directory, which makes an application a multi-tenant application, as well as what you are targeting is the personal account. That means consumer identities offered by Microsoft, which can be user@outlook.com, user@hotmail.com, or user@live.in or live.com, whatever it is. Okay. So this third option means that for your application, in fact, Azure AD will be able to provide you the tokens that is generated by authenticating the user from any of the Azure AD as well as consumer identity platform. Okay. So I'll keep it simple. I'll select the first option. But there is one more thing which I would just like to address here, and that is for those of you who already know how Azure AD B2C works, or for those of you who might have read some of the articles related to Azure AD B2C, if you try to relate or if you try to match the underlying concept between this option and how Azure AD B2C behaves, in Azure AD B2C, any user can sign up for the application that you have hosted. And Azure AD B2C is a paid subscription feature, whereas this option will come by default in any of the Azure AD B2B directory. So this directory on which we are working right now is Azure AD B2B directory. Now, those of you who don't know what is B2B, there is a playlist for B2B as well, which is already created in the channel. If you guys want, you can review that as well. So we have covered two options as of now. The first one is a name, and then what kind of identities should be able to sign in to your application. Now, redirect URI is the easiest option that is available with all the identity provider, and we all are very much familiar about this particular option. In plain English and in easiest definition method, it means where the response should be sent by the identity provider after the user is authenticated. But this value is also sent by your application when it sends the authentication request for the very first time. Now, whatever value that you are going to implement here should also be present in the authentication request, because if this value will not come, Azure AD will throw an error and say an app with this particular redirect URI doesn't exist in your directory. It's a very generic error that you might have already came across, or you will learn when we'll talk about the exact advanced troubleshooting. So as of now, The default console or the first console gives you only these three options which can be customized. And the moment I will click on register, as of now, an application object and a service principal object for this particular display name of my application is already been created. So as of now, what happened? I have created, I have tried registering an application named as app registration hyphen custom app. And for this application object is created, whereas a service principal object is also created, but that can be accessed from the enterprise application section. Now let's talk about what all information you get in overview section. So this is your client ID, which you will be using in your app code. This is the directory ID. That means the object ID for my directory itself. Then you have object ID. This actually means that it is the object ID of my application object. So as of now, this console that you're seeing is the application object configuration, and this is the object ID of my application object. Now you have the first setting, in fact, the second setting that we were selecting, that which user should be able to sign in. So only the users of my directory should be able to sign in. Then you have redirect URI. Then if you want, you can also add an app ID URI. And then managed application in local directory is also sort of category. The moment I will click on this, it will show you what all information can be customized. So now if you see this particular section, this is the same set of information which you will get if you will go to the enterprise application section. Let me show you guys the same set of options. So what I'm trying to address here, that we were accessing the application object console, right? But since we know that with an application object, a service principal object is also created. So if I'll go to Azure Active Directory, and now if I'll go to Enterprise Application, and now if I'll search the application which we have just created, as you can see, this is the same console which we see here. Okay, so now I'll click on close, and as you can see, this is the overview section of my application object. Now how this object is related with this service principal object, because this value that you see here, which is app ID, which is ending with CB09, will be same for both the objects, CB09. Okay, now let's move on to our next option, which is branding. Now this is a very generic tab. If you want, you can customize it as per your requirement. You can choose a specific logo. You can give a homepage URL. You can have terms of service URL. You can have privacy statement. And if you want, you can also choose a custom publisher domain. But what you have to make sure that whichever domain you are selecting here, that should be a part of your directory. Now, the next option was authentication. Now, depending upon the scope of your application, if you are targeting other platforms as well, then you can click on this particular option and choose the respective one which you are targeting. Now, the scope of this application is not to let you know how to code, so covering this option honestly will not make any sense. The next option, as you can see, is redirect URI. Now this is the same value which we have given initially when we were registering the application. If you want, you can add logout URL as well. Now there is a flow that falls under the category or falls under the scope of Oauth, and it is implicit grant flow, wherein there is a JavaScript handler which exists in the website or which queries your endpoints to get the authentication token. Now, implicit grant flow, by any chance, if any of your application is using and you want to enable access token and ID token for that flow of OAuth as well, then you can do it from here. Now, this section shows you which kind of identities can actually sign in into this particular application. Now, this part which says that treat this particular application to be a public client, this has its own relevance. But honestly speaking, I have not seen, common cases wherein this part should be allowed, because this is a kind of flow where the redirect URI has not been sent. Okay, and there is a specific flow called resource owner password credential or resource owner password grant flow. Now, what was the case or what was the issue with that particular flow? Because there was a very big issue, in fact, with that particular flow, because you need to know what is the user's username and password, and that was something which was never ever, entertained by any of the enterprise. But since Azure AD has the capability to offer you all the flows, you have this option. But honestly speaking, I'm not really sure whether ever you are going to use this particular setting with any of your application or not. Okay. So this was all about knowing the authentication part. Now, the next section is certificate and secrets. So likewise, you have the purpose of client ID and client secret, wherein an application authorizes or authenticates itself with the help of a secret. Similarly, you can have a particular certificate uploaded as well, and then you can use this certificate instead of client secrets. Now, client secret is nothing new. We have been working with this from a really long time. So what I'll do is I'll type something over here and I'll get one client secret generated, because this is something which we will be using with our script. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly save this option in one of my scripts. So the moment we initiate the script, we should get appropriate results. The next information is token configuration. Now, if you guys remember the video that I have posted yesterday, generally for the entire channel, over there I was talking about claims mapping policy, right? Because with claims mapping policy, you can actually choose any of the claim to be embedded in a token and then sent to the application. But the option that you choose here, which is add optional claim, you can actually select any of these claims to be included in a particular token. But what you see here is most generous list. In fact, any customization that you're doing from on-prem, likewise, let's say your application need distinguished name for any of the app, for any of the user, right? Or your application needs manager attribute, then you will not be able to do it from here. For that, you need claims mapping policy itself. So this option which you see here, token configuration, can be used to add optional claims as well as group claims. What kind of group information you want to be mentioned in the token that Azure AD is sending to one of your application. Now this option that you see here is API permission, is moreover related to graph and how graph works. So whenever you add an application in your Azure Active Directory, by default, that application will get this particular permission. But if there is any specific permission that you have to grant for any of your application, then you can come to this particular section and you can check whatever APIs you want. You can click on delegated permission and then you can give the respective permission. Now, one more thing which I would like to do here, and I would like to brief you guys about that as well. The client credential flow of Oauth is something wherein the token is given to your application. The access token is given to your application and it will never contain any user attribute. Okay. As of now, just listen to what I'm saying in terms of understanding how the flow will work. But I can assure you guys, when I will be covering the entire flow of both the protocols, in fact, in total, the entire 5 flows, I will again explain all this in a lot more detail. But as of now, understand how it is going to work with the application object. Okay. So when you are using client credential flow, that means when you are going to use client ID and client secret, your application will run as a daemon service. That means there is no user interaction, right? If user is not typing username and password, then there is nothing for which your application will get authorization. Now understand something, which is if your application cannot interact with any of the endpoints, if it cannot have any view of certain information which Azure AD has to show, then there will be no consent prompt, okay, with which your application can interact. So for these kind of scenarios, you have to select this particular option, which says your application runs as a background service or daemon without the signed in user. So what I'll do, I'll select this option and then I'll go to the users section and then I'll make sure I give this permission, which is user read all. Now, as you can see that I have given the permission, but still this permission will not work because it has not been consented. So what I'll do is I'll click on here and then I'll click on this option which says grant admin consent for concepts work. So now what this permission will do for my particular application, that my application will be able to read users data. That's the only purpose of this particular application. Now, the next option is expose an API. Now, if you are developing any API that you own, you can add it here and you can define your own scopes as well. So likewise, we know OpenID, profile, email, these are scopes defined for OpenidConnect as a protocol, which every identity provider adheres to. Similarly, when you have your own API, you can define your own scopes and you can have different consent displayed for admins as well as users. Now, once you have added a particular scope or once you have added a particular API here, then you must authorize a particular client. Now, if I add any test value here, okay, let's say I'm adding this consent display name and the consent description, and I'm enabling it. Now think about like this. Likewise, you authorize an application to access graph. Similarly, you're going to authorize an application to access the API that you have developed. Okay, so this section of expose an API is used to expose an API that you are developing. I'll close this and I'll go back to the owners section. Now this is very simple. You can just define some set of owners for a particular application, and when they will sign in, these application will get listed as owned application. Now this section which says role and admin, it is more over something that belongs to the custom roles of Azure AD. If you want, you can have custom permissions defined. For some of the users, you'll have a role created that you can assign to different kind of users, but this has nothing to do with how an application works. But this section that you see here is what we called manifest. It is very important because if you will read the article on developers community for this particular manifest file, this has many things which can be customized from here, and that will affect how the application is going to behave. So if you remember guys, yesterday when we were trying to address the claims mapping policy, I changed this option from null to true, because then only the mapping policy is going to impact a particular application. And it's not only about this particular value that you can see, all the attributes that are associated with an application object will get listed over here. Now, there is one more thing which I would like you guys to relate to, and that is if you guys try to observe the structure, it's a JSON object, or the listing or the way it has been structured right now, it's a JSON object. And this is how mostly, this is how most of the objects are actually structured in Azure Active Directory. Okay, so if you guys remember when we were talking about exposing an API, there are certain informations that we have mentioned, and as you can see, that is also getting listed over here. Okay, now when we were configuring application, there was an option which says allow auth implicit flow. As you can see, as of now, this is showing as false. But if I come back to authentication and let's say I allow these two options of implicit grant and I save this, and then I'll come back to this section of manifest, what you will see that allow implicit flow will be set to true. Okay, so in a nutshell, any attribute that exists with an application object can be customized from here. But I would really appreciate if you guys will go through with this particular article wherein it makes you understand what is the relevance of each and every attribute that you see in an application object. So now we are left with one last thing, and that is showing you guys how the script part works, with a client credential flow, verifying whether the configuration that you have done for any of your application is working appropriately or not. So the use case here is, let's say you are an admin and a developer or a development team contacted you and they said that please provide client ID and client secret and we need this specific permission, and then you want to verify whether everything is in place or not. So what you can do is you can copy this value, and then I will be sharing this script in our community post. So don't worry, just replace this client section, this client ID with your client ID, then generate a key from this particular section which says certificates and key. I have already copied this value to my script. Then in the redirect URI, make sure you're mentioning the same set of information that exist here, which is HTTPS localhost. In my case, I'll go back and I'll refresh this one and I'll replace this one. And then in the grant type, make sure you have selected client credential, your resource is graph, and then it's a variable here called tenant. Now, this is the script, a general script, but I'll explain you guys quickly what all it is going to do. So firstly, I'll get a prompt where I will be typing my tenant name. It is going to query the well-known configuration. It will go ahead and check the authorized endpoint. Then it will check the token endpoint, and then it will use this particular body or this particular object to make a REST method call to graph and this particular section which is beta users. And if you guys remember, while I was talking about the app permission, I have actually granted this application the permission so that this script can query data without user interaction, because a script can have user interaction, but the flow that I wanted to show you guys is the client credential flow. Okay, so now the expected behavior is when I will run this script, it should give me the information about the users that exist in my directory. As you can see, it is asking me to type my tenant name, and as you can see, I'm getting the information about all the users. Now, one more thing which I can show you guys quickly, and that is this access token. This access token is actually the token which is going to contain the claims of application, but not the user, because there was no user interaction. So as you can see, you cannot find any attributes that are moreover related to users. So this was all about knowing how the application registration process work, what all settings can be customized. Okay, now this video is especially for members, but the videos that I will be posting tomorrow, in that video I will be covering SAML app as well. So I would request you guys to watch that video as well. The kind of details that I'm covering over here is moreover everything that you need to know. But if still you think I have missed something, please use the comment section like anything, and I will answer all of your queries. So a quick summary about what all we have discussed. We have discussed how an application registration process works in Azure Active Directory, why you should choose that particular option. We have also discussed about every property that is moreover related to application object that can be customized. In the next video, we are going to talk about how to create a sample application that can be used to do testing, and we will use the same application to go ahead and troubleshoot issues which are publicly listed by Microsoft and some of the common issues, as well as the advanced process or the advanced capabilities in terms of troubleshooting. Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. If you guys have learned something new, or if you have any feedback, question, or query, you can directly reach me at learnconceptswork@gmail.com. If this video is helping you to learn anything new, or any of our video is helping you to learn anything new, please feel free to share the channel with your technical community. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.